Welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Otoma Edje. This is season 3, episode 58. I'm very excited to have on the program today Elizabeth Laing Thompson, who is in North Carolina. She has written an awesome book. I believe Becky has a copy she can hold up for us, which
All
is
the
called
Feels.
All the Feels. And so joining us today also is Becky Castle Miller, who is going to be sharing a little bit about some of the research that she's been doing also in relation to Jesus and his emotions. So for those of you that may not be aware, Elizabeth Laing Thompson is an author. She has written a number of books. We couldn't totally come up with the number before the podcast here, somewhere around 9 or so. But she writes about clinging to Christ, and really just right now, one of the big things is working through our emotions. And as we get through our time today, we're going to cover 3 things. The first is the 3 emotional types that Elizabeth has kind of defined, and the beauty of each one of them. The second is, despite our varying emotional types, we'll learn how we can all have happy lives and happy homes. That's very important. And the third is something perhaps we don't think about a lot, is Jesus's emotions. And so again, welcome to the program. Again, this is Image Bearers. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing and clicking like. As we go ahead and get started, we're going to have Miss Becky start out with the first question for Elizabeth.
Great. So in your book, All the Feels, you talk about 3 different types of feelers. Can you share about each one of those and the benefits of each type? Like, there's no bad type of approaching emotion.
Yes. And I'm so glad you said that, because, you know, just as God himself is so, he just has so many different qualities. So we all, in the way we feel, we reflect different parts of the heart of God. And together we make a beautiful, you know, body in the church and a beautiful planet full of variety of people. So I am what I call a big feeler. Hello. And I like to say that when I'm happy, I'm not just happy. I am throwing a parade and shooting off fireworks. Like, so much joy, so much excitement. And big feelers, their joy is infectious. They love to savor life and celebrate. Now, on the flip side of that, sometimes when we're sad, we want to, you know, crawl into a cave or dig a hole and bury ourselves and never come out. We can sometimes struggle to pull out of our gargantuan feelings. But big feelers are incredibly empathetic. They're great at putting themselves in other people's shoes and saying, you know, I relate to that feeling. I have been there, felt that. On sort of the opposite end of the feeling spectrum, we have what I like to call the reluctant feelers. And these are people who, it's not that they don't have feelings, they just kind of prefer not to. They reluctantly engage with their emotions. They really excel in areas of logic and truth. These are people who are very fair-minded. They're not easily swayed by the temperature of the crowd or the feeling of the moment. They're gonna stick to the truth and the facts. And so their giftedness lies in just being dependable, in being rock solid. And these are the people that you want in your life. When you feel like your life is falling apart, you're going to run to a reluctant feeler and be like, tell me everything's okay, and prove it by still being yourself and being okay. That's going to be your reluctant feeler's moment to shine. And then kind of in the middle of that, we've got people who I call steady feelers. And my husband is a classic steady feeler. So steady feelers, they have big emotions. But if I like to think of our feelings as sort of living in a box, whereas like with the big feeler, my box is always open and possibly spilling out all over the house. A steady feeler is going to have some big feelings, but they can box up that box, like close it up, seal it up, put it in a closet, and take it out when it's an appropriate time to process that feeling. And so I think they have a really unique set of gifts in that they are very empathetic, they experience strong emotion, they relate to it but they can maintain forward motion. They're less likely to get sidelined by emotions. And so this makes them very motivating, emotionally intelligent leaders many times. So that's how I describe the 3 different feeling types.
Do you know much? Have you read much about the Enneagram?
Yeah, so I would not consider myself an expert in the Enneagram, but my sister loves her some Enneagram.
Okay.
So she is always trying to diagnose me. I think she's diagnosed me as like 4 different Enneagram types at this point. So I do love Enneagram, but I don't know if I could like be an expert on, if you immediately said the number, I might not know which one was which.
'Cause I was just wondering, like, as I was reading the book, and I'm not an expert either, but as I was reading your book, I was like, she has got to be a 4. So you'll have to ask your sister if she thinks that's accurate. But like 4s have big emotions. They tend to be those big feelers. They feel everything intensely and they feel very unique in the world. And so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on kind of mapping the 3 feeling types to different Enneagram numbers.
Oh man.
Or if that's too much of a stretch.
That would be such a fun project. I feel like I would need to study some of them a bit more. I'm really familiar with like the 1, the 3, the 4. So yeah, I'd have a hard time identifying all of them, but I think it's a really fun system. And my kids right now are really into the Myers-Briggs personality types.
Yeah.
They like all day, every day at our house. It's, are you an INFJ, an ENFJ, blah, 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 blah. So they're really,
so what do your kids think your Myers-Briggs type is?
Okay, we can't decide if I'm an ENFJ or an INFJ because I think I'm an ambivert. I'm not a full introvert. I probably relate more to the introvert, but I'm not a full extrovert because people wear me out. I can go be super extroverted and then I have to like crawl into my bed for 3 days and recover. So I don't know what that makes me.
I would have definitely guessed the NFJ, and I could definitely see you being on that ambivert, like not sure if it's introvert or extrovert, but definitely I'm INFJ.
So
I can relate
oh my
to
goodness.
that. INFJs are like those very emotive people, feel things really deeply and passionately, but it's my Enneagram is an 8. So I'm in like the gut, like that side of intense emotion.
Okay.
And like anger can be like the primary emotion for an 8. It's like lots of injustice fighting and all that. So you'll have to ask your sister and your kids that they need to come up with this big map with like your 3 feeling types and like how it overlaps with Myers-Briggs and Enneagram. I would love to see.
I love it. I'm totally going to do that. That'll be really fun project.
So you mentioned that each type of feeler is important to God. And in your perspective, you think that Jesus actually shows different examples of relating to those 3 different types. What are some examples from his life in the Gospels where you feel like he demonstrated those different feeling types?
Oh goodness. I love thinking about the emotional side of Jesus because I think that's something that we're not necessarily introduced to a lot in church growing up. We're it's more this like list of to-dos and he's righteous and he's perfect. And we forget that like Jesus was intensely emotional. I think one of my favorite big feeler moments of Jesus is in John 11, when Lazarus has died and he goes to comfort Mary and Martha. And there's this moment that seems to baffle theologians where Jesus stands at the tomb knowing in about 2 minutes, he's going to call Lazarus back from the dead. And this funeral is going to turn into a party. But Jesus stops and he weeps. And I have read so many books where they're like, well, why would he cry? And they just seem utterly baffled by this. And they're like, well, maybe he's mourning his own impending death. Maybe he's like putting himself there and thinking about how he's going to die for the sins of the world. And I'm like, dude, you're trying way too hard. Jesus felt these sisters' pain. And this is my guess. Jesus can tell us when we get to heaven with him, of course. But I think Jesus was incredibly empathetic and his friends were hurting. It didn't matter that that pain was about to go away. What mattered was that they were hurting right here and now, and his heart went out to them. And there are several other times in scripture where that word splagnizomai, I think, the Greek, I don't know why I remember that Greek word, but I do, where it says like Jesus' insides went out to someone who is hurting and in pain, and you could see it on his face. So I love those big feeler moments. I think Jesus exemplifies this strength of the reluctant feeler every time he stands for truth and justice. And he is not cowed by the emotions of the crowd. And he stands for what he stands for, and you can't change his mind. And he does that time and again. And then certainly he is, I think steady is an incredible word for Jesus. He marches on, he feels for people. He'll stop the whole, procession for, there's a time, it's in Luke, maybe chapter 9, where there's a widow who he sees a funeral procession, a widow who's just lost her only son. He stops his whole crowd and goes up and touches the casket and raises this woman's son from the dead, stops everything, makes himself unclean, and then moves on and continues to preach and teach, changes someone's life, heart goes out, and then keeps moving, forward moving. Jesus, I just absolutely love how we can see his heart just leaping off the page.
Do you have any times when you would call him a steady feeler?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is actually
that's
one of those moments where it's like he stops and his heart goes out, but then he carries on with his ministry. Right. He doesn't just stop, I think, and just stay and let me piece this woman's life back together. He's like, okay, let me do what I can, let my heart go out to you, but then I'm going to carry on with the mission that God has given me, and I'm going to continue teaching and preaching. And to me, that's that classic steady feeler of incredible kindness and emotional intelligence, but also that forward motion.
Yeah. You talk about the concept of the happy house, and your husband telling you, like, this is a happy house and only happy people can come inside. What are some of the ingredients for building a happy house, building a family or a community structure that's emotionally healthy?
Yeah, to me, this is one of the biggest challenges that we all face, is figuring out how do we create an environment at home where every different type of feeler who lives there can thrive and have enough space to express their emotions in the way that they need to. In my house, 4 kids, 2 parents, and a dog. There are a lot of feelings at any given time, but we all express them so differently. We have one who I would call a reluctant big feeler. Has a lot of big feelings, prefers to keep them buried. And so it's like hard to get them out. And that person tends to get a little bit drowned out by some of the louder, bigger feelers in our family. And so the 3 principles that I really encourage people to keep in mind are self-awareness, selflessness, and self-control. And it's so important in a household that we are all self-aware, that I know my tendency as a big feeler is going to be to suck all of the emotional oxygen out of the room, to make everything about me. I'm having a great day, so we're all happy. I'm down, so you all, everybody leave me alone. I'm down. I can't be the thermometer or the barometer of the house. You know what I'm trying to say? I can't set the temperature of the house based on my fluctuating moods. I've got to be self-aware that that is my tendency, and that's not fair to everyone else in my house. And so that teaches me, okay, well, I know my tendencies, I know my temptations. I want to be selfless. I want to not just think about my own emotional state today or my own emotional needs. I want to be aware of, what does everybody else need? Is this the right time for me to process this feeling, or do I need to wait? Do I need to pray at a different time and place? And then, because when we're selfless and we care about other people as much as ourselves, like Philippians 2 talks about, then we begin to cultivate self-control. And we say, it's not that I'm stuffing my feelings. It's not that I'm ignoring them or pretending they're not there. I'm just going to deal with them at the right time, in the right way, with the right people, which may or may not be the people I live with. I might need to talk to someone else. So those are the principles that, no matter what kind of feeler you are, I think foster an environment at home where everybody feels safe, everybody gets a chance to be heard, to process, and nobody gets left behind. Nobody gets sort of shunted to the side while the bigger, louder feelers take over. It makes room for all.
Yes. Yeah. Reminds me of the definition of emotional health that I've kind of been working toward, which is expressing the appropriate emotion, like that are situationally appropriate. Like when you can do that, you're generally emotionally healthy. If something horrible happens, you're going to feel angry and sad and grief. And God made us to feel those big feelings when bad things and good things happen. But it's like being proportionate to the stimulus and doing that appropriately in like a balanced way. And that's, I love the way you put it. It's self-control, selflessness, and self-awareness. Are those the three? Yeah.
Yes.
Such good principles. And I love some good alliteration.
It makes it easier to remember. I can't help it. The writer in me.
Yes. In chapter 8, you talk about a distinction between sharing each other's burdens and borrowing each other's burdens. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah. So I think some of us, we struggle with knowing where the boundary lines are between our feelings and other people's feelings. And we tend to take other people's, hurts and pains and problems and struggles onto our own shoulders in a way that God doesn't necessarily call us to do. We are absolutely called as Christians to share one another's burdens, share one another's pain, comfort, serve, acts of service, listen, guide, encourage. I mean, there are so many things in that one another relationship that we are called to do. But I think there's a healthy way to do that and an unhealthy way. And I like to think about it. Again, I guess I keep coming back to this analogy of boxes. I've moved a lot in my life, so boxes have figured largely in my life. But let's say that somebody is carrying a burden in a box, and sharing that burden with them says, hey, let me help you lift that. Let me take a little bit of the weight off for you. I can carry part of it. I'll even help you bring it into your house. I'll sit there while you unpack it. I'll listen. I'll talk to you. I'll make you some tea. Now, that's all healthy and good, and we are called to do that. But borrowing that burden would be when your time with your friend is over, you say, you know what, I'm going to take this box home with me and make it mine. And it's going to live in my house, and I'm not going to let it go. And that's where we sort of over-identify. And it's like, well, if you're not happy, I can't be happy. If you're not okay, I'm not okay. And then we suddenly our own emotions are no longer under our control anymore. They're controlled by someone else's life. And those are things we can't control. And so that's what sort of helps me anytime I'm tempted to over-identify and take somebody's grief or pain or sin or whatever that difficult emotion is home with me and try to live with it for too long, Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that analogy. I also have moved a lot. So box analogies really work well for me.
You get it.
And I think in the same way, part of our own emotional health is making sure that we are bearing the weight of our own emotions and not like externalizing the processing of them, making someone else make us feel better. Like our own box is our own to carry. And when we push them on other people, then we're in the unhealthy position. So I think it's so important both ways.
That's such a great point, because it's like there's emotional work we all have to do. And sometimes we really wish somebody else could do it for us. Like, wouldn't that be great? But there's stuff that we have to work out with God at home. Yeah. And people can pray us up and support us. But yeah, they can't do that work for us.
Yeah. I mean, as parents, we kind of, when our kids are little, we kind of emotionally regulate with them. Like we let them borrow our sense of calm and our sense of self and groundedness. And we ground them and we help them come to stability. But like, as they become adults, they've got to like individuate and take that on themselves to have healthy relationships as adults.
Oh, and as a mom, I will say that is the hardest relationship for me to detach from, like on the way to school, my kids are sort of dumping their stuff and I'm like, by the time they get out of the car, I'm like wanting to like walk with them and fix it for them. And I can't.
Yeah. Like
and
they
God
feel
and
better.
I had
And
many
then
a conversation about this.
They feel better for dumping. And then you feel worse because you're like
carrying this all day.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, I'm going to hand back over to Otoma and let him ask a few more questions.
Great.
All right. Well, I appreciate your book so much. I know for me, as I think about it, my wife is likely a big feeler from what you have noted. She works in the medical field. And I think it's sometimes hard for her. She comes home with a lot of, I guess, borrowing maybe some of the burdens and different things that are going on. I think for myself, I'm probably more like a reluctant feeler. So I think one of the things that you noted, in your book is a helpful way that even reluctant feelers can help those going through challenges. Because yes, a big feeler is going to feel for someone else going through challenges. A steady feeler is likely going to be able to feel and empathize, sympathize for those that are going through challenges. But a reluctant feeler, you also said there are things that a reluctant feeler can do to assist people who are going through challenges. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. One analogy I read one time of all places, this was in a Facebook thread about where people were talking about being a big feeler. And I think the term they were using in this conversation was being an empath. And one woman commented, she said, what my husband always tells me is I'm like a sponge that gets full, and sometimes I need to be wrung out and kind of emptied. And I think that's something a reluctant feeler can really give as a gift to your bigger feeling friends and families. You can say, hey, share with me what's on your heart. Because sometimes as a big feeler, we just need to verbalize it. We just kind of need to, I say vent, but I don't mean that like unfiltered, sinful speech. I mean, just pour it out like, this happened at work today, and this was heartbreaking, and here's what I felt, and here's what I thought, and here's what I struggled with. And just the act of wringing out those emotions is cathartic and helpful, and helps us to put words to, hey, maybe this is something that God and I need to work out. This is something I need to surrender in prayer. This is something I need to think through because I don't know where to categorize it. That's a tremendous gift that you can give as a reluctant feeler, being aware when the big feelers in your life need that opportunity to share, and then just be validated. You don't have to fix it. I think the reluctant feeler off because they're so good at fixing and they're so good at thinking clearly, your temptation is going to go right in and fix. And I'm not saying you can't. There may be a time when your bigger feeling friend is ready to hear and ready for counsel, advice, wisdom, logic, all the gifts you bring. But in that initial like wringing out phase, if you can just validate and say, wow, I bet that was really hard. I'm so sorry you went through that. Let me pray with you. Those are incredibly encouraging gifts that you can give to bigger feelers. And then later, when they've kind of calmed down and their sponge is not so full and just slopping out on the floor and dripping everywhere, they'll be like, okay, can you help me think this through? Do you have some scriptures for me? Do you have some wisdom for me? And that'll be your chance to shine again.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned acts of service was something that also can be, done by reluctant feelers.
Yes, because you may not be like, I don't have the right empathetic words to say, but here's what I can do. I can go get you your cup of coffee, or I can help carry part of that load for you. I can make your life a little easier. That's a tremendous gift as well, for sure.
Yeah, I also, it was also once said that it's not good to ask, let me know if there's anything I can do for you. The best thing is to initiate and say, can I do this or that for you? So it's kind of back in the person's court. So quick question for you, a little bit off script to a degree, but can someone transition from one to another? Like over time?
I love that question.
More of a big feeler, or they become a steady feeler based on wherever they started out at?
I absolutely love that question. I don't think I've gotten it before. And I think the answer is yes. And I'm going to use my parents as an example because my mom and I were talking about this. She took there's a quiz, like a diagnostic quiz in the All the Feels book. And she's like, I think when I was younger, I was a big feeler. I was kind of all over the place. I was very dramatic, empathetic, and all the beautiful things that a big feeler is. But then she married my dad, an even bigger feeler than she is. And so out of necessity, somebody had to adapt. And it was mom who adapted.
That's a good point.
So she was like, I think I kind of grew into a different role and sort of took on some different character traits that I didn't necessarily naturally have, but I cultivated them over time. So I do think, there can be some transition that happens out of necessity.
Sure. Do you think that through COVID, the people that have been affected the most have been big feelers, or you think it's been kind of equal, or what's your thought?
That's a great question. I think it really depends individually on how you've processed it. I'm sure some big feelers have felt it a lot, but I do think big feelers tend to be self-aware and know, hey, I'm not okay. And so we may be the most likely to speak up when we have needs. I would be a little more concerned about the reluctant feelers who are sort of muscling through and, you know, stuffing down those feelings and saying, nope, this is not a good time. Nope, nope, nope. And maybe have some pent up things they've never addressed. I will say, in all the Zooms I've done with different church groups around the country, I think the steady feelers struggle the most with self-care because
Really?
they output so much. Their empathy does make them, you know, sought after leaders and sought after influencers or just guides and mentors. And so they output. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, I never took care of myself. And I actually do have a lot of feelings here.
Good point.
So, you know.
Yeah. I almost think it's not a bad thing for, you know, church leaders and even families to go through your book and get an understanding of where they're at so they can know how to help one another, but also obviously in leadership to know, you know, these are the kinds of individuals that could burn out more based on different things that are going on. So I think it's a helpful guide in that respect.
Oh, good. I hope so.
So yeah, based on your study of scriptures, I know there's you identify, you know, the 3 different types of feelers. Can you share about some of the characters in the Bible that would fit into those different categories, and maybe just share a little bit more about one of them?
Sure. Oh, okay. Well, in the book, the examples that I give are, I give an example of Hannah as being a possible, and of course, this is my guess based on, you know,
Sure,
the snippets that we have, but Hannah possibly being a big feeler. We see her exhibiting very strong, dramatic, outward emotion when she is struggling with infertility. And then on the other side of that infertility, her gratitude and devotion and loyalty to God and the vows she has made of devoting her child to God are in keeping with the kinds of dramatic gestures that a big feeler might make. I talk about Paul as possibly being a steady feeler because his letters, they have such a incredible blend of passion, enthusiasm, conviction, heart, love for people, incredibly deep relationships. But he's such a forward mover, leader, and
Right.
he's able to push past that and say, but here's the truth. He's not going to get all caught up in the emotions so much that he gets swept away by it. He's very devoted to truth, forward motion, carrying on the kingdom of God, no matter what, the mission to reach the Gentiles, to bring Jews and Gentiles together. He's a great example, I think, of a steady feeler. And then the example I gave of a reluctant feeler is Abraham, who there's this wonderful exchange that I find kind of amusing. I mean, the context is not amusing, but the conversation it kind of is, when Abraham goes to rescue his nephew Lot, who's living, you know, in Sodom, and God says, "Hey, I'm going to destroy this city." And Abraham talks God down. He's like, well, far be it from you, Lord. Abraham just completely stays neutral, does not get all heated. He's like, Lord, pardon the interruption, but you know, if we can find 50 righteous people, could you spare the city? I mean, far be it from you to destroy a city with 50 righteous people. And God's like, okay, sure, good point. And then he's like, well, what about, pardon my interruption again, what about 40? And he's just like cool-headed, calm. I love that. And I think that's the gift of the reluctant feelers, that they are able to say, okay, this big dramatic thing is about to happen and it's horrifying, but let's keep our heads. Let's think it through. Let's talk to God. Reluctant feelers may be really good at like sort of negotiating in prayer, like Abraham, who knows? But I love that story about Abraham.
Thank you.
So I don't know. I kind of dove into all 3 of them a little bit. I don't know if I answered your question exactly as you asked.
Bonus episode today. So yeah, I know you mentioned you've gone through and done a bunch of Zoom calls, which is kind of par for the course these days. For different churches. What's been the feedback you've received so far from your book?
Well, it's been really fun getting to connect with different women about the kind of feeler that they are, seeing the light bulbs go on as people not only figure out who they are, but also understanding. I've had a lot of people tell me, oh, this really helped me to interpret some other people in my life who I just didn't get why they were the way they were. And now I realize, oh, this person is a reluctant feeler. I'm expecting unfair responses from this person. That is not how they are designed by God to react. Let me, but now I see their giftedness as well. So I think that's been fun to hear. I do think the insight about steady feelers needing to take care of themselves is something that really came out in those conversations over and over. People
Yeah,
would
that's
say,
quite an
I'm
insight.
a steady feeler and I need help. I'm not doing well.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's been helpful.
Have you noticed that one gender is more a big feeler or steady feeler or reluctant feeler? Have you noticed any? I got my guesses. I'm not sure what Becky's thoughts are, but what have you seen anything based on the feedback you've received?
I mean, I hesitate to like make a generalization. I think our natural assumption is that women tend to be bigger feelers, but I have to tell you, some of the biggest feelers I know are men. Some of my family members, the most big dramatic feelers among us are the men. So
yeah, that's my experience with the research and observation as well, is that emotion is not gendered, but the emotion concepts that people are encultured to construct are very gendered. Like some cultures don't allow women to be angry, but the only emotion they allow men to show is anger. And so because of the cultural influence, men's and women's emotion concepts are shaped by culture. So they may appear more, men may appear more angry and women less, but that's socially constructed. And sometimes when people say emotional, what they mean is like prone to tears. And because women have been socially trained in our culture that it's okay to cry, and men have been trained it's not okay to cry, they see women crying and they say women are more emotional. But then you see like domestic violence rates where most perpetrators are men, and there's a lot of like unhealthy anger. That's just as emotional, if not more so than crying, but like we don't call it emotional. So there's just so much social conditioning and language around this.
I think women are probably more steady feelers because I think they have a better grip of handling their emotions. I think men don't do a great job of talking through and getting a handle on that. So maybe there'll be a study that can prove or disprove that, but those are kind of some initial thoughts, I would say. So Liz, could you please share about how we can find out more about your ministry and some of the great things you're doing? I know that you've written some essays and poetry that's appeared in Huffington Post, as well as Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a surprise to me, which is awesome. But can you please share about some of the ways we can find out about you?
Sure. Well, I mean, I take tremendous joy in connecting with readers from all over the place. You can find me on my website, elizabethlangthompson.com. I've got a lot of resources on emotional health and just a lot of sort of scriptural collections, kind of to say, hey, if you're feeling this, these scriptures might help. I love offering those kinds of tools for people. I've got a lot of free book club materials and resources for people if you are considering discussing the book as a group. I've got like free devotional guides and discussion guides and that kind of thing that you can easily download from my site. I'm on Instagram at Elizabeth Laing Thompson, Facebook, Elizabeth Laing Thompson Writer. So sort of the usual suspects. Oh, I did, just since we're on YouTube, I just launched a YouTube channel for teen girls and the adult women who love them, because I just came out with all the feels for teens.
I was just going to say that, yes.
Yeah, so now I'm on YouTube. It's a brand new channel. It's just getting started, but I'm excited about having some of these feelings conversations with girls and the women in their life who love them, and hoping to bridge some of those generational gaps, in communication. I feel this, you don't understand me, all that fun stuff. So that's the goal of the YouTube channel.
That's awesome. And that's a good media to communicate with teens and some of the younger generation, which I'm a part of. I'm just kidding.
Sure you are. Of course
the next question is, when is your TikTok channel launching?
Oh, TikTok. People keep asking me, I'm like, do you really want to see me dance? I don't think so. If you saw me do the Cabbage Patch, and if you know what the Cabbage Patch is, bless you. You would not want to see me on TikTok. But hey, God can do anything, so you never know.
All right, going to switch gears a little bit for I got a question for Becky, and then we'll continue. So I know, again, thanks for joining us today, Becky, but I know you're also an author, as we stated earlier, and you are studying out Jesus and his emotions. So question for you is, what led you to study out Jesus's emotions? And, what have you been learning through your research?
I think it's probably what I can gather from Elizabeth's book, probably the same thing that led her into the research and writing. It's my own emotions. I never learned how to handle my emotions or cope with my emotions. I grew up in a really kind of emotionally repressed subculture of Christianity. And so it wasn't until I had postpartum depression after my second child that I started to see a therapist and learned how to talk about my emotions and identify them and just allow them to exist in my body and allow my emotions to help me understand truth about myself and my situation and things that were going on. So I really wanted to understand emotions. So I started studying it for myself. And then I started looking at Jesus in the Gospels and realized Jesus was incredibly emotional. And so I started trying to write a book about 5 or 6 years ago about Jesus and his emotions. And I realized I just didn't have the study skills to do that well. So I went to seminary. So now I did my master's thesis in seminary on Jesus's emotions and emotions in discipleship. So now I'm like, okay, I have the skills now to write this book that I wanted to write. I know how to do New Testament scholarship. So I'm working on a book that combines neuroscience and discipleship and gospel studies, and look at the latest theories on emotion in the neuroscience field, like Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion. That's some of her language that I was using earlier, like talking about constructed emotion and our emotion concepts that are so shaped by our culture. So I've looked at Jesus through the lens of constructed emotion and say, like, what emotion is he constructing here? And what are the cultural, religious, linguistic influences that gave him his emotion concepts? And then translating that into the discipleship world and saying, how can we disciple our emotions just like we disciple every other area of our lives? We look to Jesus for how to handle our money. We look to Jesus for how to handle our time. We look to Jesus to understand how to pray. Why aren't we looking to Jesus to understand how to manage our emotions? And so I love that Elizabeth has done some of that work in her book, as well as taking Jesus as our example. So I want to apply that to a discipleship framework and talk about, as we make disciples of others, as we ourselves grow as followers and disciples of Jesus, how do we look to him, see how he led his emotional life, and let that influence our emotion concepts so that in the moment we are constructing more Christ-like emotions and being more like Jesus in our emotional life as in every other area. So that's kind of the big picture of what I'm trying to tie together. We'll see how successful it is. I'm still working on the manuscript.
I feel like it ties together everything you've done. Well, not everything, but a lot of the things you've done so far, which is the gospel, a lot of studies on that, discipleship, of course, and then obviously, you mentioned you did, your master's on emotion. So I think, when is your book due out?
I am working on the book proposal and the manuscript right now. So it's going to be a couple years before it's out. My thesis is, I've made it available to people. So if people email me, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll send you my thesis. But it's academic. So it's not ready to be read by the church yet. There's like 4 chapters of 10,000 words each. That's not really readable for your average reader. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, it'll be out.
Okay.
Sounds awesome.
I'm
excited to read it when it comes out.
Thank you.
Can you share, before we move on, can you share about some of the books that you have co-authored?
Yeah, so I did an online study guide for Scott McKnight's new edition of the Blue Parakeet that's on the Zondervan Academic website. So if you ever want to teach a small group or Bible study through Blue Parakeet, it's everything. I created PowerPoint slides, chapter summaries, teaching activities, classroom activities, quizzes and tests to give students, essay prompts. It's a whole like course on Blue Parakeet. That's a free download on the Zondervan academic site. And then I wrote a study guide to Scott's Reading Romans Backwards called Teaching Romans Backwards, that's published in a thin volume from Baylor University Press. So it's like the two companions. You can get Scott's book and my study guide, which again it's a whole, everything you'd need to teach a course on Romans. And at the back of it is a story I wrote about Phoebe carrying the letter to the Romans. So one of the appendices is this biblical fiction that I wrote about Paul and Timothy and Phoebe working together to write the letter, and then her journey and her interactions with Junia in Rome. And what it was like for her to present that letter to a Jew and Gentile
You put
audience.
Junia in there too?
I did. I put
You weren't
Junia.
playing now. You just, that's like double dipping.
I really, one of my favorite parts is the conversation between Phoebe and Junia. I love picturing them together. Because I realized like they crossed paths. I mean, Paul greets Junia and Andronicus in the letter. Phoebe delivered it to them. Of course she talked to them. And so
that makes sense.
Someday I am going to write a fiction novel about Paul's female friends, like Phoebia and Junia and Euodia and Syntyche and Lydia and just all the women and their interactions as leaders in the church. So that's someday, awesome. Like when I finish all these other books. Anyway, and then I wrote Following King Jesus, which is a 24-week discipleship curriculum based on 4 of Scott McKnight's books. And that is small group material and also personal studies. So I wrote Bible studies, and then small group discussion guides, prayer prompts, learning activities. So if you wanted to do a whole year of discipleship in your church, that's a great curriculum to use. And the last one is Living the King Jesus Gospel. I think you have a chapter in that, right? Yeah. So the Festschrift. Yeah, I didn't let you get away with that. They what? I didn't let you get away with that. Yes, that just came out. Well, see, the thing is, we've been keeping it a secret for 2 years. So you're used to keeping it secret. So I'm used to keeping it a secret, so I don't talk about it. But yes, now it's public as of 2 weeks ago. So we put together a Festschrift for Scott, which is like celebrating his scholarship and his writing. And it was edited by Nijay Gupta, one of the other professors at Northern, and Tara Beth Leach, and a couple others. And so I have a chapter in there on living the King Jesus Gospel by advocating for abuse survivors. And it's kind of 101. Here's how to understand abuse for pastors and how to respond well to survivors. I would love to make that publicly available by itself, but Whitfin Stock now owns the copyright to it. So you have to buy the whole book if you want to read the chapter. Okay. Thank you. All right, well, let's go ahead and transition. We'll go ahead with the lightning round. All right. So Elizabeth, these questions are for you and they're super fast paced. You can do 1-word answers or, quick 1-sentence answers, and we'll go through these in a lightning round. Okay. First of all, what is your favorite type of food?
Chocolate. Yeah. Is that a type? Because yes. To me, it's a food group.
It is. Okay. What is your favorite film or TV series?
TV series is The West Wing. We watched it multiple times. Love it.
Nice. What is your favorite book of the Bible currently?
Currently Matthew.
Nice. Who's your favorite Bible character?
I think I got to say David because, big feelings, flying all over the place. He's helped me a lot.
Nice.
Appreciate him.
Outside of the Bible, what's your favorite book or author?
Philip Yancey is one of my favorite Christian writers. And then I read a lot of YA fiction, like secular, passion of mine. So Cassandra Clare is my probably favorite YA author.
Love it.
Not everybody will know who that is, but I love her.
Yeah. I have a 15-year-old daughter, so we should compare notes on YA fiction because I read the books that she reads too. So what book do you think everyone should read in the next 12 months?
Oh, in the next 12 months. I recently read, it's been out a while, but Timothy Keller's book on pain and suffering. It's like a long title, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And I think we've all walked through a lot of pain and suffering the last couple of years. And it was really a thought-provoking, heart-healing read for me. So.
Wow. Yeah. What would you say is the most important theological book in the last 50 years?
Oh man, I meant to think about this more. I honestly don't know what to say to that one.
We can broaden it to like faith-based biblical studies. Like it doesn't have to be just theology.
Most important one. I mean, I don't know how you
say
narrow
for
it down to
you.
one.
This doesn't have to be like universal proclamation, but
Okay, well, I will
what's one for
tell.
you?
Okay, yeah, for me in my personal life, okay, now I'm like drawing a blank. There was a book that Philip Yancey wrote on prayer that I really wished I had or known about. I don't know the timeline if it existed when I went through infertility, and he dove like unflinchingly into a lot of the questions I had about the compassion of God, the kindness of God. Is he there? Sorry, Philip, I'm drawing a blank. I think it's just called prayer.
I think it is called prayer. It's like
right?
a yellowish.
Okay. Like,
cover.
why can I not think? I think it is. It has a long subtitle, but I think it's just called prayer. That was like really axis tilting for me when I read that. I was so grateful for his honesty and courage in that book.
Great. So what is your favorite place to live and where would you most want to visit?
Ooh, okay. Honestly, I'm living in my favorite place. We've lived a lot of places, but coastal North Carolina has really become home for me. I love the people here. It's super down to earth, chill, fun. And then lately I have an obsession with going to Iceland. I just think it is such a cool country, literally and, metaphorically. And I love the idea that it's like a small country. I don't know. I'm fascinated by that. So one day Iceland, I will be there to visit.
If you could put a billboard in the middle of your city, what would it say?
Okay, I think it would quote the proverb that says, the first to present his case seems right until another comes forward to question him. In this culture of like snap judgments, I just think the Bible can help us calm down, hear both sides. Let's hear both sides, people, before we freak out all over each other. So
important public service announcement.
Yes. Please listen to both sides of the story, or maybe there's a 12th side to the story that needs to be heard.
Last question. What is your favorite music?
Okay, this is going to reveal my dorkiness. I love pop opera. My favorite group is the Tenors. They used to be called the Canadian Tenors, and they sort of blend like pop music with opera. Like they're just sort of classically trained voices, and it's really beautiful.
Wow.
So
I have never heard of that genre. I am going to go look that up.
I don't know if that's what they would call themselves. That's what I call it. But look up the Canadian Tenors.
Okay.
Holy cow. Amazing
Cool.
music.
Love it. I'm looking forward to checking that out.
I write to it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for definitely all of you for your writing. I think words are very powerful, and you guys do just a great job of just taking concepts and making sure they're understandable and helpful, to people. And I think this book, especially, I think is a very important and a very timely book, especially with a lot of emotions going around, or even lack thereof, depending on, or I guess repressed or whatever you want to call it, with COVID. And I'm sure that we're only scratching the surface of, or have heard just about the surface of some of the challenges that people have experienced and perhaps didn't know how to navigate, and are still, we're still in some ways going through those challenges. So I think your book is definitely very helpful with identifying and giving some solutions, to that. So thank you for your book.
Yeah. Again, if people want to see it, it's All the Feels. Isn't that a great cover? I love the cover. It's so evocative with our tangled emotions and making sense of them. I love this.
Yeah, so I think the top part is all tangled and the bottom is like untangled. It's kind of like, I guess, maybe that's
but I love how it's still not a straight line, Libby Dykstra is the designer on that. We talked a lot about that. Like, what are we saying with these?
Yes. I love a good book cover, and this is a good one.
Oh.
All right.
Well,
Becky, thanks again.
Really fun hearing your thoughts, and Otoma, thank you for having me. I so appreciate just the conversation and thoughtfulness.
For sure. And thank you again, Becky, for taking time.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
We have 9 kids that don't have their mommies for right now. So appreciate it.
Both our houses are probably destroyed, but that's all right.
But we
got through this.
It was quiet for an hour. So.
Yes. Well, thanks again for your time. Those of you that enjoyed the episode, again, please remember to click like and subscribe. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.